Hi, Rashonda here. We are reading Hagar's Daughter by Pauline Hopkins, and we are on chapter, wait a minute. This also says chapter 28. It did say to be continued last time. So it says chapter 28 concluded. Oh, I didn't know chapter 28 was in two parts. All right, let's read on. When Jewel came to herself, she was lying on an old-fashioned canopied bed with a coverlet thrown over her. When she came to herself, I guess she got knocked out when she was kidnapped. The room was evidently originally designed for a studio and was lighted by a skylight. Even now, a flood of sunlight streamed from above, making more dingy and faded by comparison the appearance of the dusty canvases and once luxurious furniture scattered about the apartment. Evidences of decay were everywhere. A broken easel leant against the wall, and on a table, odds and ends of tubes, brushes, and other artistic paraphernalia were heaped in a disorderly mass. There were also a couch and easy chairs in faded brocade. The girl looked about her with languid interest, scarcely realizing what had happened to disturb the serenity of daily life. Presently, however, the power of thought returned, and with it a flood of memories concerning the outrage of the night before. She was a prisoner, but where? So now she is a prisoner and her husband is a prisoner. What a terrible sensation it was to wake to the consciousness of being a prisoner. A prisoner. She, Jewel Bowen, who until recently had never known a care in her short existence of 20 years. So many would argue that any woman of that time was a prisoner of some sort, imprisoned by either her husband or her father or the male who had rule over her. So she went from perhaps a gilded cage, which is a cage nevertheless, to a worse sort of a cage. Now all the waves and billows of life were passing over her, threatening to engulf her. Could it be that all her bright hopes for the future were to end here in this lonely chamber? With the thought, she arose hastily from the bed and began walking despairingly about, examining the room. After a tour of the apartment, she gave it up. Her prison was well chosen. The doors were bolted and no window gave a possibility of escape. There was no chance of attracting attention by her cries from passerby. Even if scores of persons traversed the streets about this house, no one would know that within its walls a desolate girl suffered the keenest of mental torture. I am not happy she was kidnapped and is imprisoned. Is she suffering the keenest of mental torture? I feel like there's probably worse mental torture out there. But this is I wouldn't want to do it. Let me not pretend like I want somebody torturing me. I do not. And then I wonder, like, what sort of burden of race is mental torture, particularly if you are knowingly passing as a different race? Clearly, we all have guesses about who Hagar and her daughter are and what race Jewel and Mrs. Bowen are, and what they know about what legal race they are, despite what their faces may be telling them. And I imagine all of that is a sort of very keen mental torture. She paced the room frantically and shook the doors of her prison violently until she was obliged to sink exhausted upon the couch. They will hardly let me die of hunger, she told herself, resolving to save her strength for questioning whoever should bring her food. Crouching upon the couch, she listened. Not a sound broke upon her ear. It seemed to her that desolation engulfed her. Presently, as she sat there, the sound of a football came to her strained ears. Then a key grated in the lock. The door swung open, and a tall, pleasant-featured black man entered the room bearing a tray. I think that should say footfall. The sound of a footfall came to her strained ears, not a football. He carefully locked the door behind him, removing the key from the lock. He wheeled forward a small table and deftly arranged the contents of the tray upon it. Jewel launched an avalanche of questions at him, but he returned no answer. He went and returned a number of times, bringing her clothing, books, and luxuries of the toilet, all indicating that a long captivity was in prospect. At lunchtime, an aged negress brought her food, but all efforts to engage her in conversation were unavailing. A more morose and repulsive specimen of the race Jewel had never met. After this, there was a monotonous interval of time passed in the agony of silence. Her meals were furnished regularly and all other needs lavishly supplied. One day was the record of another. 4 weeks must have passed since she was brought to this place. Still, she had no knowledge of her captors, nor where her prison was located. One change, however, was made. They gave her the freedom of an adjoining room as the summer heat increased, but the windows were barred and looked out upon extensive gardens filled with the ruins of what must once have been buildings and offices of a large plantation. The once well-kept walks were overgrown with weeds, and a heavy growth of trees obstructed the view in all directions. One night she sat by the window, gazing at the stars and eating her heart out in agony and tears. Oh, was it last time? Was it this time? No, they talked about her being 20 years old. And if I'm sorry, it just dawned on me that they pointed out that she's 20 years old. And I'm pretty sure it was 20 years later after Hagar ran off. I'm trying to flip back to see if I could get to it. But I'm pretty sure it was 20 years later. So that was a clue dropped right there that I'm passed by the first time. All right. The once well-kept walks were overgrown with weeds, and a heavy growth of trees obstructed the view in all directions. One night she sat by the window, gazing at the stars and eating her heart out in agony and tears. She could not sleep. Insomnia had added its horrors to her other troubles. Suddenly the sky became overcast and the stars disappeared. A storm threatened. Low mutterings of thunder and gusts of rising wind foretold a summer shower. At intervals, a lightning flash lit up the inky blackness of the scene. Finally, the flashes became so vivid that the girl moved her seat from the window to a less exposed position with a scornful laugh at her own fear of death. Truly, she thought bitterly, self-preservation has been called the first law of nature. How we strive to preserve that which is of so little value. Up and down the sides of the room, her eyes wandered aimlessly. Sometimes she felt that she was losing her mind. Presently, a painting fixed into the wall arrested her attention. It was the portrait of an impossible wood nymph, but so faded that its beauty, if it had once possessed any, was entirely gone. As she gazed at it indifferently, the center bulged outward, and a small strip of canvas swung to and fro as if from a draught of air. Jewel sprang to her feet and ran to the picture. She trembled with sudden hope. Where did the draft come from? Carefully, she raised the torn strip of canvas and inserted her hand beneath it, feeling along the wall back of the picture. There was a narrow recess behind it. Greatly excited by this discovery, she flew to the table where her dinner service still remained, seized a knife, and cut the canvas close to the frame for a good distance up. Then she tremblingly raised the cloth. Oh, joy! It revealed a passage usually closed by a door which had become unfastened and now swung idly in the breeze made by the rising wind. Thank heaven! It was an hour when she was free from interruption. No one would disturb her until morning. She took the lamp in her hand. Escape seemed very near. Scarcely waiting to widen the aperture, she crept through and soon stood covered with dust, trembling, shaken with emotion in the dark passage which the canvas had hidden. She paused and strained her ears to listen for sounds in the silent house. None came. Then she crept on, very, very cautiously. The passage was dark. It had evidently led to the servants' quarters at the back of the house when mirth and gaiety held high in the glorious old mansion. She went swiftly on till she came to a black baize door. B-A-I-Z-E, baize. I do not know what that word means. She went swiftly on till she came to a black baize door. She pushed it open with difficulty. Here she paused, irresolute, for this door gave admission to the front of the house. There was a passage at right angles with the one just quitted, with stairs leading above and below. She glided toward the ladder, seized hold of the banisters, descended into another passage with many doors opening into it. The doors were all closed. What a rambling old place it was. In the excitement of the instant, she had felt no terror, but now an icy chill seized her and her heart throbbed heavily. She noticed now that one of the doors in the passage was ajar. Dare she pass it? To advance was appalling, but the case was a desperate one. With her heart throbbing wildly, she stood motionless one instant, then she ventured past the unclosed door. She shaded her lamp with one hand and with fascinated gaze took in one brief instant the contents of the room. Her eyes wandered from the bare floor and walls to the table, the two chairs, and then to a bed in one corner. There her gaze lingered, for on the bed lay a woman of dark brown complexion and wrinkled visage. About her head was wound a many-hued bandana handkerchief. The woman's eyes were open and fixed in terror and amazement upon the girl who had just entered the room. They gazed at each other for one moment, these two so strangely met. Then the old woman threw her arms above her head, exclaiming, "Bless God, I's ready. Praise the Lord. He done sent his angel Gabriel to tote me home to glory." The sound of her voice broke the spell that bound Jewel. "Who are you, Auntie, and what makes you think me an angel?" "Lord, honey, is you human sure enough? Why, when I seen your face shining on me there and hearing your soft step coming in the lonely night, I made sure it was the Lord come to carry this po sinner to her home in glory. I expect I've been shut up here so long I's getting doty. I's a poor black woman, been dragged away from my home and chillin' and locked up here by a limited devil, cause he's afraid I will tell his wicked actions. But deed, child, where'd you come from? Does you live in this place?" Jewel shook her head sadly. "I'm a prisoner too, Auntie. I've been shut up here for 4 weeks now. I happened to find a way out of my room tonight, and I thought I might possibly escape. Can you tell me where I am?" "Yes, honey, I can. You's down in the old Ensign plantation in Maryland. I was born on the next joining place myself. But who brung you here? What's your name, child?" "I haven't seen my captor yet, but I believe it to be General Benson. My name is Jewel Bowen." "Mercy King! My lovely lord, but ain't this curious!" exclaimed the old woman, greatly excited. "My granddaughter is your waiter, Venus Johnson." It was now Jewel's turn to become excited. "Then you are Aunt Henny Sargent. That's me." And thus ends that chapter. Well, I really have been wondering what was up with Aunt Henny, so now we know. All right, this is getting gooder and gooder, as my former associate pastor would say. Until next time,